Hey there. Well, this is a long time coming. So a couple years ago, we had a planetary public health crisis. You may have heard about it. I wasn't able to make the Goose because of that. And then the next year, I thought, I'm going to be at the Goose. And then my doctor said, you have a brain tumor. And I said, I don't think I'm going to make the Goose. And then last year, I was still in recovery, not quite feeling right, but I'm going to give it a try. And I'm driving here, and it's about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I blow out a tire, and I decide to pull off in the nearest exit, which was a mistake because no one around me. It was complete darkness. And I called the rental car company, and they said, we can have someone out around 2 a.m. I was beginning to lose my religion at that point. And I was texting with the staff here saying, I think I might make it still. And then they got to me, and they put on a temporary tire, and they said, the thing is, you can't drive more than 60 miles. And I said, the thing is, I need to go more than 60 miles. And they said, well, what you can do is exchange your car. And so you can do that first thing in the morning. So they drove me, we went to a hotel. Long story short, I didn't make the Goose. Having said all that, I got a lot to tell you. So for the next 5 or 6 hours, settle in, friends. So, okay, here's the thing. Growing up in school, they would always take attendance. And I feel like we need to do that this morning. It was always a bummer in school because I had to wait patiently for them to get to the P's. And that was not fair, right? Because the A and the C and the D people got rid of it right away. But I want to take attendance today. So when I call you, please reply loudly here. Lovers of humanity? Yeah. Okay. Exhausted activists? Yeah. Bleeding heart liberals? Yeah. Physically funky people in need of a shower? Yeah, we know. Helpers? Healers, caregivers, damn givers. You are present and accounted for, Wild Goose. All right. So I began ministry about 25 years ago, and the past decade of that time has been spent ministering to a sprawling, disparate, virtual congregation made up of people all over the planet. And in the work I do, both in person and online, I do a lot of speaking, but I try to do a good deal of listening too. In fact, I hear or read hundreds of stories each month, and at this point, I don't consider myself primarily an author or a writer or blogger, even a pastor, but a collector of stories. I consider myself a war correspondent. I travel to a new town, or I show up in a different community, or I reach people where they are online, and I enter the trenches of life with them, and I say, tell me what's happening here on the ground so that I can tell the folks back home. And this gives me a front row seat to their varied experience of being human. People give me proximity to their pain. They show me their grief. They share with me their struggles. They reveal to me their dreams, and I bear witness to the words people speak, and I listen for the places that their voices shake. And I leave that time with them asking myself, what do they wish they could say if they could find words to it? What do people who aren't having relational proximity or geographic proximity with them need to know? How can I connect their humanity with the other people whose humanity they might never meet? And this is the place I write and speak from. You've heard a lot of great sermons this weekend, right? Think about how many sermons you've heard in your lifetime. A lot of them, right? Having said that, I'm not interested in giving another sermon. This will not be a sermon, it will be a reminder. This will be a report from the road. This will be a report from a war correspondent. In fact, I'm not even going to begin with a scripture passage. I'm going to allow you to choose your scripture passage. I want you to find a story from the Gospels, a time when Jesus was with his disciples. They were teaching, preaching, healing. What were they doing? Jesus and his disciples. Find that story in the reservoir of your memory. And then we can begin. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I pride myself on saying stuff that needs to be said. So let's get this out of the way right at the jump, okay? Pretty soon, we're not going to be here. I don't mean on this hillside, friends. 100 years or so, and we are all goners, every one of us. You, me, the people we adore, the people we despise, those passing us in traffic and on our timelines, the people half a foot or half a world away. We're all hopelessly temporary. Sure, we're all doing our best to bob and weave valiantly against gravity, but barring some serious medical advances, she is and will remain undefeated here. And in a breathtaking flash of time, our time here will have expired and we will cease to be. And in just a few decades, our names and our achievements will eventually fade from collective memory, largely swallowed up by time and progress. Now, friends, we can and we probably should debate the elusive mysteries and promising possibilities of the afterlife another time. But this life, TikTok, friends, it is later than you think. Now, I'm pretty sure I don't have to tell you this. While many people spend their lives avoiding the reality of their impending non-existence, numbing it with sensory distractions and retail therapy and TV binges, I'm guessing that the fact that you've spent your weekend here means you're probably not one of them, at least all the time. I'm guessing you're here because you aren't a stranger to existential crises or big questions or the examined life or sleepless nights. And I imagine you feel the urgency of these days and the terrifying velocity at which it is all flying by. And since you have working empathy, you are probably beyond exhausted. Exhausted humans? Yeah, you're here. You want it all to matter. You want you to matter. And because you do, I wanted to make sure you don't bury the lead today before you take another breath. Yeah, pretty soon, you're gonna not be here. But you are here now. And that is fairly big news. You're present for this day, and it wasn't a guarantee that you would be. Approximately 150,000 people died since you and I went to bed last night. Lots of people who were here yesterday aren't here anymore, but you are here. That story should be the all caps, bold type headline in your head, but it will soon be crowded out by trending disasters on your timeline, by relational implosions you're enduring, by the length of your to-do list. It will be crowded out by all that is calling you beyond this hillside. And it's quite likely that soon you'll be so overwhelmed by the tasks and appointments and worries and obligations in front of you and the fatigue of carrying it all that you'll forget that you're alive. And I want you to stop for a second and remember. Press your thumb firmly into your wrist until you feel the blood pulsing fiercely beneath it. When you've got it, say, I got it. If you don't got it, call the health services. Pause, breathe. Notice the rise and fall of your chest, as shallow and rapid as it sometimes can be. And when you feel the rise and fall of your chest, say, I feel it. Be aware fully of the sights and sounds and, yes, the smells around you. And now that you've confirmed that you're alive, ask yourself why you live. Who or what is worth spending yourself on behalf of for the rest of the time that you have? Is there still something worth fighting for, Wild Goose? See, I don't know you and I don't know your story. I haven't collected your story. I don't know your why. I just know that you have one, a burden you carry, a cause that grips you, a dream that you can't shake. You have a hill worth dying on. You have a face across from you in the living room. You have some nagging, defiant part of you that refuses to quit despite all the experiential evidence that says that you should. And this is the reason you're still being here matters, because of how much is still worth fighting for. A rapidly heating planet being swallowed up by unchecked gluttony is worth fighting for. A fractured nation teetering precariously on the edge of white supremacy taking over and fascism engulfing it is worth the fight. The decades of human and civil rights rapidly evaporating around us and the people that those things represent are worth fighting for. Already vulnerable people being driven by their leaders to the limits of what the human heart can endure, they are worth fighting for. Your treasured relationships that are pushed to within inches of disintegration right now, they are still worth fighting for. And most of all, friends, the exhausted and brave human being staring back at you in the mirror who easily forgets how much their presence alters this place is worth fighting for. So much is still worth the fight, and we, the people of the common good, as human beings of faith and morality and conscience, we cannot willingly cede any of it. We cannot let the sun go down on this day without doing everything we can to save the things worth saving. Because we are still. We are still. And being here comes with an invitation and it comes with a responsibility, friends. Recently, I asked my social media followers what gives them hope right now. A myriad of reasonable and predictable replies came back. Children, grandchildren, spouses, partners, meaningful work, food, sex, laughter, music, and lots of dogs. But there was also an unsettling pattern to the responses I received. Despite every breakdown of our election processes and our legislative safeguards and constitutional protections over the past few years, and despite being perpetually let down by elected officials and church leaders and federal judges, far too many people are still inexplicably waiting for saviors and superheroes to come and save them. They said things like, "I have faith that God will make things right." Hear those words. "I believe that love wins. I trust that goodness will persevere." The prevailing wisdom by so many people seems to be that love or God or someone out there is going to save the day. And I wish it were that simple. I wish it was that cheap and clean a proposition. Offer up some skyward prayers or make a public floodlight appeal to the heavens and wait for our inevitable rescue. But that's not how this is going to work. It's not rational. It's not biblical. It's not possible. So contrary to the t-shirts and memes, friends, love will not win on its own simply because. Courageous, empathetic, pissed off people armed with sacrificial love, fully participating in the political process and relentlessly engaging the broken systems around them will win. When the vast, diverse army of compassionate human beings that we've enlisted in spend themselves on behalf of other people, when they keep going despite being exhausted, when they refuse to tire of doing the right thing, when they will not be shamed into silence, then love will be winning. Love isn't some mysterious force outside of our grasp and beyond our efforts that exist disconnected from us. It's not supernatural magic. It is hard-ass work. It's the tangible cause and effect of giving a damn about our families and our neighbors and strangers and exercising that impulse in measurable ways. Love is ornamental and worthless unless it moves from aspiration to incarnation. And thank God you are to do that. All apologies to my theist and deist friends here today, but God is not going to magically make things right here. That's not part of the deal. When Jesus feeds the multitudes, the first thing he says when alerted by his followers to the need is, then you feed them. And even when they shrug their shoulders at the impossibility of the circumstance, he asks them to bring whatever meager provisions they can collect so that he can multiply them. So God or the universe or whatever you believe holds this all together isn't fixing this without a movement of people. We who are harboring a ferocity for humanity, born of our moral convictions and propelled by our spiritual centers, we're going to need to move in order to make right all that is so terribly wrong. We're going to have to sacrifice sleep or relationships or comfort in order to step into the messy, jagged trenches of this effed up day and uneff it. We are the beautifully stinky, imperfect angels who get to bring the good tidings of great joy. And we know from our friends in politics that thoughts and even prayers alone aren't fixing this mess either. What will alter the story that we find ourselves in is prayerful people who reflect fully on the fractures and the malignancies and injustices in front of them and decide that they will change what they can change and they will do what they are able to do. See, the prayer that Jesus offers in the Sermon on the Mount is not concerned with escaping skyward to heaven. It's bringing heaven down. And heaven will come down as ordinary mortals here on the ground, endeavor to be the answer to as many of their prayers as possible. That's not to say there aren't beautiful, elusive, wonderful things working outside of what we can see and measure here. But it means that we are able to do physical things. We're able to help and heal and give and protest and volunteer and canvass and vote. We have proximity and agency as disciples, as followers. We always have proximity and agency. We have someone in front of us and we have the ability to do something about the person in front of us. And if we do those physical things, friends, in the here and the small and the close and the now and the doable, then we can then welcome all the mysteries, knowing we did all that we could with what we were entrusted with. Friends, you are still God isn't going to ensure that our schools are safe for LGBTQ children. Love isn't going to make assault weapons less available in our streets. Jesus isn't going to secure our elections to prevent wannabe dictators from taking power. Love isn't going to legislate protections for the planet and the poor and the marginalized. God is not going to dismantle the systemic racism afflicting our nation. Jesus isn't coming to shut down social media disinformation and make our neighbors wiser to Fox News fakery. Love isn't going to push back against anti-immigrant bigotry. You and I are, whether we are compelled by love or God or simply an acute sickness in our stomachs that will not let us rest. Human beings fighting like hell together for the common good will do these things. That's why I'm here, and that's why I hope you're here, because it's probably going to get a little worse before it gets a little better. Warriors for the common good? I've been a pastor for a while. I've gone through deconstruction, which more accurately should be called demolition. There's a lot I'm not sure of these days. Anybody not unsure disciples? Yeah. I have a lot of uncertainty, but here's what I know. I know that Jesus was about more than just getting people's ticket magically punched to heaven. Because if that's all it was about, if it was merely a transactional exchange for the afterlife, the Gospels would have been far shorter. They would have consisted of a well-crafted altar call, and that would be about it. But instead, we see a Jesus living in relationship with people, dining with them, moving through the world, healing, feeding, embracing. We see Jesus showing that theology is embodied or it is useless. The only relevant religious worldview is relational, friends. I wonder what story you were thinking of. I was thinking about this story, which I mentioned. I'm going to read just a short section of it. When Jesus heard that John the Baptist was gone, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. And hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, and he healed their sick. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place. It's already getting late. Send the crowds away so that they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." Jesus replied, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." And it ended well. Now, I may be preaching until it gets dark and Chick-fil-A's closed, so we're in trouble. But friends, think about this. Whatever story you thought of in the scriptures of Jesus and his disciples, why did the disciples exist at all? Jesus invited the disciples to experience life alongside of him. Why? So that people with his empathy and his courage and his love for humanity would be present in his absence. He said, "I will be with you, but you will be with them." Jesus said, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me." He said to them, "I have washed your feet. I've given you an example to replicate." Jesus said, "The people are hungry. You give them something to eat." He said, "Love one another as I have loved you." He tells the parable of the Good Samaritan, and he speaks about mercy, and he says, "Go and do likewise." He gives the disciples the authority to heal. Jesus says to them, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome it." Friends, this is the invitation Jesus offers to those of us who would follow him in the ways of compassion and mercy and love and justice. It is a ministry of presence and proximity. It is a beautiful act of being with people and emulating him or perpetuating whatever you believe is worth perpetuating in the world. He is saying, you are here, do whatever it is you know to do right now. Because the story I so often hear is, "John, I'm overwhelmed, I feel hopeless." Those are the words of someone who don't recognize that they're alive, who don't understand that there is beauty and courage inside of them, and it's now about them showing up and making it known. So who or what will you evangelize for with the rest of the time that you have here? I attended Pride here in Raleigh a few weeks ago. I was with my son and my daughter. My wife happened to be away, and it was beautiful, and it was disheartening. There was so much positivity, such a sense of optimism, people there simply to live authentically and others to celebrate that authenticity. But there were tangible reminders that there are people who are so threatened by others' very existence, they feel burdened to go out of their way to protest their joyful experience of this life. Their attempt to be fully seen, their desire to simply be. And we came upon them. I don't like to use us and them right now, but you'll understand what I mean. A group of street preachers with their signs and their megaphones screaming about God's judgment, which turns out is a really terrible way to get people to listen to you. And I thought about them as I watched them, this one gentleman in particular. I thought about the fact that he and his family had to make plans to be there. Just like everybody else. They had to mark the date on their calendar and prepare. They made signs. They got batteries for their megaphones, and they drove and tried to find a place to park. And they passed hundreds, if not thousands of people, and had the opportunity to actually meet them as human beings, and instead moved through the crowd, found their designated place, pulled up their milk crates and their signs and their megaphones, and began shouting at them as they passed by. And friends, this reminds us of a good lesson regardless of our theology or our politics. If you're set on hating people, shouting at them instead of talking to them will always make that easier. Now, the festival had prepared by making these beautifully decorated fabric walls, and they had volunteers holding them up to shield attendees from the people holding signs, telling them not to give benefit of a conversation with the people there. They started handing out party favors, and we began clapping and singing to drown out the hateful minority, to serve as a wall between people and those fear-addled human beings wishing to do them harm. And this was an embodiment of what allyship and activism and advocacy look like, being a buffer to the least of these against the hatred of the most of these. And these brimstone preachers, friends, we know they are self-fulfilling prophets, delivering their punitive religion with dehumanization and rage, with no kindness or joy of any kind, and then saying to themselves, see, these sinful people reject God. And this allows phobic religious human beings to ignore people's humanity and perpetuate the narrative of the godless, immoral culture, rejecting a Jesus that they made no effort to show them because they can no longer see him. Or worse, the presence of Jesus is now offensive to their God story. And this is why they've weaponized the word woke, because their religion has put their hearts to sleep. Awakened souls? So we drove back home, and we're in the parking lot of the grocery store, and my 18-year-old son said, I really wish life could be like what we just experienced. He said, I feel like we're back in reality now, and it's depressing. And I said, we were just having that experience back there, and now we're here, and part of our responsibility is to make ordinary life more like that, to normalize diversity and acceptance and expansive love. And friends, that is what the gospel said. Jesus says, you have experienced all these things. It's not unnatural, it's just beautiful, and people need to see it, so you have to live it. And this happens when we see our lives as a form of radical activism, because social justice, friends, it's not a program, it's not a date on the calendar, it is a life lived oriented toward equity. Pride Month just ended with a Supreme Court decision that paved the way for businesses to deny LGBTQ human beings services based on religious objection, right? Equally crushing legislative news has come regarding the right to choose and affirmative action and student loan debt. Here's the thing. These human and civil rights rollbacks have been made possible by people claiming to be followers of a Jesus that they would have complete contempt for. In this day, we find ourselves being called to be advocates for the common good in a world where it is now more difficult, the opposition more galvanized and emboldened, and the need for empathy far greater. And thank God you are here. So what can people aspiring to goodness do during days like these? Thank you. I know what I want to do. I think it's what you want to do some days. You want to quit. You want to pack it in, stop giving a damn, find another place to call home, maybe move to a bluer state or to a kinder nation. And if we can't do that, we at least want to turn off the news and be oblivious to the losses and the overreach and the regression, like so many people we know who don't seem the least affected by anything right now. But we know, friends, that we cannot do any of those things because If we do, those celebrating the rollbacks and the regressions will have an even easier time bending the arc of the moral universe away from justice. The book banners and the wall builders will be emboldened. They will have fewer barriers between them and those they seek to render invisible. And I know with all that we have lost, there is more that we could lose, which means there is always something worth fighting for. Persistent fighters for the worth of every human being. Today, with the next few hours we have left, I'm going to ask you to be irrational. Irrationality and spirituality are often tethered together, and it's okay if we admit that. Hopelessness is probably the most rational response right now. Looking at the stripping of human and civil rights, seeing the compromised Supreme Court gutting the fruit of generations of activism, seeing a twice indicted, twice impeached traitorous former president still worshipped, and knowing what we know about the people we live alongside and love. Hopelessness makes sense, but we can't choose it right now because hopelessness would mean that we concede to the wall builders and the book banners, not only the recent past, but the present and the future as well. See, friends, falling into permanent despair or apathy would be giving away not merely the last few days or weeks, but today and tomorrow too. It would mean allowing those motivated by fear and exclusion to win the battle uncontested. More importantly, hopelessness seeds the narrative within our heads to those who do not deserve that gift. If you have let anyone else decide for you how you feel about the world and your place in it, you have failed. It is about you realizing that you are here. Because I think we're supposed to be people of the resurrection. And I think someone forgot here. In 1942, Viktor Frankl was sent to a German prison camp where he would be for 3 years while losing his father, mother, his brother, and his wife. He ended up surviving that time. He wrote a book many of you love called Man's Search for Meaning. And in that book, Frankl writes, everything can be taken from a human, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. We choose our own way every day that we wake up and step into a world that are faced with challenges and questions and crises and heartbreak and tragedy. We decide whether circumstances will determine our internal condition or whether we will. Whether the trending news will dominate the headlines in our heads or whether we will write a different story. And Frankl says between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. You are still. See, the present, friends, like the one we sit in right now as you inhabit this place, as you encounter these very words, the present is always the space between stimulus and response. And in this space, we have one thing, the choices we make based on what we believe matters. We don't receive guarantees of success or promises of health or assurances of safety. We also don't have control over the courts or the politicians or the systems, even while we work to nudge them in ways we can individually and collectively. But we do have the space between what happens and what we decide to do in response to what happens. Anti-Semitism is still here. And thank God you're still here to name it and condemn it. Systemic racism is not going anywhere, but thank God that you are still here to name it and push back against it. Phobic, predatory Christianity that preys upon our LGBTQ brothers and sisters is still here, and you are still here to name it as an atrocity. So the breathtaking velocity of the overreach and the regression should be alarming to us. It should cause us to grieve, but it should do more than that. It should catalyze us into moving to ensure that there isn't greater mourning in the days ahead. Friends, we need to live in the small and the close, in the here and the now and the doable. And this is so important before you leave this place, because in my work as a collector of stories, there are patterns to what people share with me, especially if they come from historically vulnerable, marginalized people. Whether transgender teenagers or Muslim activists or migrant fathers or racial justice workers, they never say, John is a white, cisgender, heterosexual man. Could you be less bold? Could you be less loud? Could you be less confrontational? They never say, John, could you be nicer? What they tend to say is, why are so many people of faith so silent right now? Why is the only expression of Christianity I see something so often fueled by exclusion and separation and cruelty, something that doesn't remotely resemble Jesus? So the courts have handed down some terrible decisions. The street preachers and their families and their churches and those who fear what they fear and believe what they believe, they're celebrating today and they are feeling emboldened. But we need to be equally emboldened to show up, to be the barriers to hatred, to be the joyful noisemakers, to be a visible and vocal presence that will not allow people to be erased. You need to be the war correspondents now, the collectors of stories, and you need to let those stories move you. Because there's always something left to lose, and there's always something that we can save. So today, instead of looking at the sky or waiting for a pastor or a politician or some invisible force to come in and dramatically beat back the darkness, you wield the brilliant light in your possession. Maybe you're the hero that you've been waiting for. Maybe you're the answer to the urgent prayers. Maybe hope is not in the sky. Maybe it's in the mirror, friends. Yes, the very less than ideal news is that pretty soon you'll be gone. The beautiful news is that people of fierce, abiding, scandalous love, you are still. Go forth in peace.
Ain't no time to sit round singing. Ain't no time to live in fear. Ain't no way to escape it. You're here, you're here, you're here. You won't break down all the great big walls. You won't change all things around you. One step at a time. One step at a time. 'Cause you're here. You're here. You're here. People will make fun of you, and people will cheer, and people will not understand you. They'll wonder why you're here. One step at a time. One move in the moment, and you'll look back one of these days and say, it was crazy after all these years, I'm still here. I'm still here. I'm still here.